There we go. All right, g'day. Who's excited to learn about culture? Woo, good. So I've been with Atlassian for the last 5 years, 3 of which have been leading various parts of our SRE teams. Today we're going to talk about culture and culture and culture. So across the industry, you've noticed culture has been a sticking point, a pain point for people. Culture is the reason why people leave companies, leave managers, leave teams. Culture is the reason why people don't enjoy where they work. I love where I work. I love the culture. And I'm here today to talk to you about what we have at Atlassian and how you can learn from it and how you can build your own authentic culture. I think you've seen the team playbook. If not, check that out. That also has some practices in it. But today, we're going to talk about how teams interact and how to make your team successful. We did a survey of 2,000 knowledge workers across the United States. We found out that 78% of them don't trust their teammates. So these people like us, people who work with computers every day, people who tend to interact electronically. This fell down to 2 main reasons, and some of you may have seen these numbers before, but 59% of them said it's poor communication, and 29% say it's a lack of accountability. Why does this matter for us? Why does this matter for ops teams? Why does it matter for DevOps, SRE, IT? Well, the reason why is when shit hits the fan, we need to trust each other. You're up at 3 a.m. in the morning, you're stressed out, you're burnt out, you might have made a mistake, you might have fucked up, you feel guilty, you feel bad. You hopefully have your team around you to help you, right? You need to make sure that you can hold each other accountable, you need to make sure your communication is crisp, clear, on point, and you need to make sure you actually come out with a good outcome. Now, I'm going to talk to you today about culture. We don't necessarily enjoy incidents at Atlassian. They happen. It's more getting through them successfully. So you need to make sure you trust each other. And to that point, most companies, when they try and solve this problem around trust, particularly in the ops space, tend to do it in one of 2 different ways. They either focus on process or culture. Now, this isn't quite a binary choice. It's more of a spectrum. But most companies tend to gravitate to one way or the other way. Atlassian gravitates towards culture. So we tend to focus on guides and guardrails, empower people to make decisions, empower people to work autonomously, and focus on outcomes and effectiveness. Now, other companies, this might be yours, tend to lean the other way and focus on processes, lots of centralized decision-making, reliance on hierarchies, really focusing on outputs and efficiency, right? You probably have seen this in some teams and some companies you've worked at, right? A high amount of process documentation, a high amount of decision-making being removed from one team, put into central places. I think you've seen this before. The reason why that we kind of, bring this up today is because Atlassian about 3 years ago was growing. It's still growing now, but it was growing quite a lot 3 years ago. We realized that we'd kind of have to hire a bunch of engineers. I'm sure you're aware, we're a software company. So we sat down and went, cool, we've got some services. How are we going to actually keep them up and running? We thought initially we'd have to train about 1/3 of all engineers, which is that blue line there, the light blue one. In incident management, we thought we'd have to get them upskilled. We thought we'd have to get them knowing how to run services and run incidents. Over time, that changed, and that's the kind of light green line that you got up there. That changed. We hired quite a few different people from quite a few different companies that ran things differently. They ran their own services. They wanted to be on call for their services. They actually wanted to run incidents. So we realized we'd have to scale up the amount of people at Atlassian that actually manage incidents and manage their services. The problem was that they come into our company with different expectations of culture, of process. They come from different backgrounds. Some of them, Atlassian was the biggest company they worked for. For some people, Atlassian was the smallest company they worked for. So how are we going to get these people working together? How are we going to create effective teams that can trust each other? Well, we kind of went back to the old thing of process versus culture. We decided to take a step back and look at where we were. The process side was largely fine. We had roles and responsibilities documented. We had reports. We had documentations and diagrams. But the issue was our culture was a bit unknown. Whenever something wasn't written down, whenever the process wasn't documented, people tend to go, oh, crap, what do I do now, and try and escalate. Again, the reversion back to the process side of things. So we kind of recognized we had a problem there. People couldn't actually make decisions on their own. They didn't feel empowered to do so. So we kind of sat back and then reflected on our values and reflected on our culture. Most of you have seen these before. These are the Atlassian values. They guide what we create, why we create, who we hire. They tend to guide us day to day. We quote them in meetings. We use them regularly. So we kind of reflected on our values, looked at them, and went, we're not really living our values. To go back to the previous slide, we're a bit unsure about how our values applied in an incident, in a stressful situation. So we went out to our teams, decided to be the change we seek, decided to play as a team and ask teams, hey, what do you need? What are you having issues with? They boiled down to 3 main areas. The first of which was certainty. Whenever something wasn't documented, people felt unsure. People didn't know what to do. That just bred more confusion and then bred more documentation. That documentation said, do things this way, which then became a problem because teams couldn't be autonomous. They couldn't function on their own. They couldn't manage their own problems. Lastly, relatedness. So teams often had an issue, bit of friction when working with each other. I'm sure you've all worked with a team that you don't like in your own company or in a previous company. Atlassian has similar problems occasionally where teams don't understand why they're working together or how best to work together, so they didn't feel related. So from talking to teams, we kind of got some ideas about that, and we created some goals about what we wanted to solve over the next couple of years. For certainty, we wanted to make sure we had a consistent process and culture between teams about how we work with incidents and then reflect on them afterwards. For autonomy, we wanted to make sure that people could actually make their own decisions. We don't want people just always following documentation steps. Might as well just automate that instead. And on the relatedness side, we want to make sure teams could actually work together, right? That's a big part of Atlassian, and we wanted to make sure we solve for that. So some of you in the audience who've seen those words before may recognize as part of the SCARF model. David Rock, for those of you unaware, David Rock wrote a paper, I think it's about in 2012, basically saying that we've evolved quite a lot, right? Previously, we'd have to deal with finding food, water, shelter, that kind of thing. Most of us in this room don't have to worry about that anymore. We now have social interactions, social situations, right? But we use the same mental muscles: risk, reward, fight or flight, threat awareness. David Rock said basically the characteristics of that now apply in a social setting and came up with 5 ways that people tend to think through that. They are status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So status is about what roles you're in, your relative importance or pecking order. Certainty is what you expect to happen actually happens in a predictable manner. Autonomy is the sensation of having choices. Relatedness is, do I feel something in common with that team or another group of people, whether you're in and out or give and click. And then fairness is basically if, you don't do something in a way that you think is consistent with what you're thinking about, then it evokes distrust. Now, the reason why these are important is because each one of these is how people feel threatened in the workplace, in a social setting, when they get challenged, right? If one of your people that you work with feels worried about one of these, they will lash out, they will have a fight or flight, risk-reward kind of problem. The reason why we focused on the middle 3 is status in incidents is really determined by the incident role. So you're typically involved in an incident because you're an expert in a given field. And fairness, well, incidents are unfair, right? If I could dole out incidents to each team individually, I would. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So, without further ado, here are the 5 cultural values for when shit breaks. I'm now going to go through each one of them, explain a bit of history behind it, explain why they are the way they are, and hopefully it offers you some insight into what's going on and why we came up with those values in particular. They each respond to a certain phase of the incident. So the first value is Atlassian knows before our customers do, and this is all about the detection phase of an incident. To quote Ricky Bobby, if you're not first, you're last. Never thought I'd be quoting Ricky Bobby, but here we are. We've learnt this time and time again. If you don't know about a problem before your customers or users do, you're immediately on the back foot. You're burning trust, potentially money even, right? And it might not cost you now, but it will cost you at some point, right? Satisfaction, trust, loyalty, whether people come back and use you again, whether people recommend you. So, not first, you're last. Really keep that to heart, particularly when dealing with incidents. Always optimize your process to be focusing on making sure you know before your customers do. What this value does represent for us inside Atlassian is good monitoring, so we want to detect problems before they impact users. Good alerting, so we want to see how, make sure people are working on something before users see it, so make sure you get the right people involved. And lastly, good communications. Inform users before they run into trouble. One of the things that I do want to call out here is that this takes a while to really sort out. You're never going to get this right from day one. You have to iterate through it. I'll talk more about that later. But what we do say at Atlassian is when we do review incidents afterwards, we do look at the detection phase here and make sure that we're looking at these things. Now, this aligns to the Atlassian culture value of build with heart and balance. For us, you can't necessarily run a service, you can't run an incident properly if you're not actually thinking about what might impact users from the get-go, right? You can't build good monitoring, you can't build good alerting, you can't send proper comms unless you know what's going on, how users might use something. So when designing or building a service, really think about that, really build the service with heart and balance. The next value we have is escalate, 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 and this is to do when responding to an incident. Before everyone freaks out, particularly those people who are on call, I'm not advocating waking up the world. What I am saying here is ask for the help you need, but don't wake people up unless you need them, right? At Atlassian, we've struggled with this a bit, depending on the team you talk to. But what we do encourage people is to get the help they need whenever they need it, right? If you're the first responder, that means you're there to take up the pager. You then need to get the right people involved to help you resolve the situation. On the flip side, if you don't feel like you should be waking up for this, don't wake other people up. Bit of open company, no bullshit time. Sorry, Bonnie Tyler, we don't need a hero. What I mean by this is you should never, ever, ever, ever feel like you're on your own during an incident, right? Hero culture is endemic in the ops world. People think they can tackle everything. We know that's not the case. You need a team involved. I think you've heard from everyone at Atlassian that it takes a team to solve a problem. So please don't be a hero. That then aligns with the Atlassian value of play as a team. No one should be ever working on incident isolation. No one should be running solo. And no one should ever feel like they're on their own. All right, our next value is shit happens, clean up quickly. This is through the resolution phase. This actually came up in one of the workshops we ran. We've got a guy who was sitting there as an SRE, and he goes, I don't care about all this process stuff. I just want to get the problem sorted out, right? Shit happens, clean up quickly. So this really matters for us. We want to make sure when you're resolving an incident, something might have broken, might not have been your fault. You just want to fix it. The reason why I bring this up is that customers tend not to care about you gathering diagnostics. In Atlassian, we've had this hard truth time and time again. Customers don't care that you're still down because you're taking a heap dump. They do care that you're still down. In the background there, you're probably seeing the cockpit. And the reason why I bring that up is that planes have something that we should all start thinking about, which is a flight recorder. So when building a service, this might apply to some teams more than others, you want to make sure that you're building proper monitoring. That means that you can't keep your service down, you can't keep it offline just so you can sort out your problem. The customer doesn't care as to why it's down, they just care that it's down. So for those of you who run services, I know like Jira, you can set a JVM setting to heap dumps, there's stuff like that you can do. You can build a flight recorder model for your service and for your services. All right. This relates to the last value of don't fuck the customer. We want to make sure that you want to make sure the customers can do their job. We want to make sure that they can always get their jobs done. This personally affects me whenever we have an incident. I really always feel for the people who can't get their job done. They don't need this in their lives. They don't need to have their time burnt by you being down. Our fourth value is always blameless. This comes from learning from an incident. We tend to attribute this in modern ops world to John Allspaw, who's spoken at quite a few conferences about this, but this is the real start of it. He wrote a blog post in 2012 talking about blameless postmortems and how it's really important for people not to feel threatened when they're learning from an incident, right? You've had a problem, you're now learning from it. People should feel like they should be open, should contribute, they should be able to discuss whatever they feel like. Atlassian follows a similar set of principles. We don't play the blame game during incidents. We don't sit there and point the finger at certain people. We have a blameless postmortem culture. This aligns to the Atlassian company value of open company, no bullshit. Now, the reason why this aligns this one is because for me personally, and for any leader out here, it's bullshit for me to really focus on the faults of someone, right? If you train someone up, if you've empowered them to do their jobs, focusing on them at their worst part is not something that we want to do as leaders, as managers, as people who care about the people that we work with. Our fifth value is never have the same incident twice. This comes from reinforcing good behavior. We've seen Atlassian. We've had quite a few teams who have had a very low historical rate of reoccurring incidents, and they always sit there and go, hey, how are we never going to have this incident again? Combined with the previous value, we want to make sure teams are learning in a constructive way. So we want to make sure that we're learning, that people aren't being blamed for it, and that people are having a positive way of contributing to an incident. Now, from those teams that did have a low incident recurrence rate, we learned 3 lessons from them. The first of which is ask how and why repeatedly, and really make sure you get to the bottom of a problem. Some of you may know the 5 whys principle. I encourage you to look that up if you haven't. There's also 5 hows. It's very similar. But what you want to do is keep going down until you found the real root cause of the incident, and really make sure that you found out what caused it. The second thing here is be open-ended. So a closed question is something that's yes, no. An open-ended question leaves people room to fill in the blanks. You want to really make sure that you're asking open questions, because that's how you get to the real root of a problem. I also ask what if, and ask if money's not a problem. Lastly, follow up. So at Atlassian, we've got a SLA attached to follow-up actions from incidents when we do our post-incident review. It's about 4 weeks for completing an action, and we hit that around 90% of the time. For those of you out there who are struggling with the same incident occurring over and over again, I really suggest you look into that and really make sure that your actions are getting completed in a timely manner. If you're not doing something different about a service or a product or something like that after an incident, then you're just going to have the same thing over and over and over and over again. The one thing that we do want to call out here is we also reinforce the values during the PIR process. So each PIR asks about the values, asks about whether this incident stood up to the values, and whether people were satisfied with it. You should be asking yourselves and your teams that every single time you have an incident. Do we feel like this was us at our best, right? Do we feel like we were doing the right thing here? Were we happy with the outcome that happened? Really ask your team that, really get a real honest answer from them, because if you're not satisfied with the way you're treating it, then you need to start changing your culture quite dramatically. This aligns with Atlassian cultural value of be the change you seek. So we want people to stand up and say, hey, we didn't do well here, we can improve next time, or hey, I can fix this, I know what to do. That really really makes a difference here. If you're not going to actually change anything, if you're not going to take it personally and go, hey, we need to fix this, then you're not going to improve your services, you're going to have the same incidents over and over again. So those are the 5 values. I'll just put them up there for a moment. Detection, and thus he knows what our customers do. Respond, escalate, escalate, escalate. Recover, shit happens, clean it up quickly. Learning, when you're learning from an incident, it's always blameless. And when you're improving, it's never had the same incident twice. I'm now going to walk you through a few tips for building your own culture. I think it's really important that you go back to your teams, think about this, communicate with them, understand what matters for you and what your own culture should be. So whether it's using these values or using something else, the real first lesson here is be authentic and be inclusive. So when we started off with dealing with this problem, we could have just had SREs, right? We could have just had executives, and we could have just done the whole thing top down. Practically, though, that doesn't work. You have to get people from different groups, you have to get people who have different backgrounds, and you have to involve them in the same room. You have a diverse set of minds, a diverse set of thinking, because otherwise you're not going to be building something that's authentic. You're going to be something that's a bit synthetic. To that point, like launching any service, you want to involve people gradually and get them to be your promoters. You wouldn't go from 0 to 100% traffic with a service. You'd go 1%, 2%, 5%, and build it up slowly. So start off small, get a couple people in different departments going, ask them, really engage them, and then ramp it up and get them to be your promoters over time. Thirdly, understand the SCARF model and use it in your teams. For those of you who are unaware of the SCARF model, I cannot speak more highly of it. Almost every situation that you have to deal with change, be it through people, technology, tools, you name it, the SCARF model applies to how people will react to a situation, how they will interpret it, and how they'll actually respond. Think about status, think about whether you're threatening their status, their certainty, their autonomy, their relatedness, and their fairness. It's really, really important. If you lead or manage people, go home, read it tonight before you go to bed. It's a good read. You'll start relating to quite a few things that you've maybe seen in your careers. Through this as well, you can also change your culture. So if you do have detractors that you're dealing with, understand how they are being challenged in one of these 5 areas, right? I guarantee you it's going to relate to one of them. Lastly, reward the good behaviors. So as mentioned before, we actually have at the bottom of our PIR template, hey, did we live the values here? Did we actually, does this stand up to what we do on a normal basis? If it doesn't, why are we changing it? We go through the 5 values and make sure that each phase of the incident actually was living the values. At Atlassian, we have something called GORE, which is the Guild of Reliability Engineering. It's a support group for those people who run services. We meet up once a month. We talk about, hey, what are you up to these days? What tools are you using? That kind of thing. We have the Rock Solid Award, which is an actual rock that we give to someone, and it's the person who lived the values the most, right? Be it the Atlassian values or the incident values I'm talking about today. Those of you who are aware of Atlassian also know that we have kudos, which is a small little gift we send to people. We also send kudos out after incidents. So if someone's done something that's kind of above and beyond, then we'll send them a kudos and say thank you. And that's something that we do to make sure that everyone is doing the right thing and that we're rewarding the good behaviors. So one last time, those are the 5 values. Thank you all for coming along today. Hopefully you've learned something. Happy to take any questions that you might have.